The city of Bath, England, is a locale with a long and storied history, dating all the way back to around 60 AD, when the Romans constructed a settlement they dubbed Aquis Solis, and almost immediately began construction of the city's iconic bathhouse, from which the settlement's name was actually derived. The Aquis Solis baths utilized one of the area's previously well-known natural hot springs to supply the facility's main, largest pool, known as the Great Bath, with pleasantly warm approximately 96-degree Fahrenheit water. The bathhouse was constructed shortly after the establishment of the settlement itself, as it's estimated that the bathhouse was completed around 70 AD, and this bathing facility was, of course, also equipped with the 3 standard hot, tepid, and cold pools that were found in public Roman bathhouses across the empire. However, the hot spring-fed Great Bath truly set the Roman baths at Aquis Solis apart from many other Roman bathhouses, with the Great Bath's lead-lined pool basin measuring approximately 5 feet deep, 80 feet in length, and 40 feet in width. The baths would see regular use until the eventual collapse of the Roman Empire. However, following its collapse, the facility would fall into a state of disrepair in the subsequent years, and it's estimated that sometime during the 6th century, heavy flooding in the region would ultimately result in much of the maligned Roman architecture's collapse and subsequent burial, with the knowledge of its previous existence evidently evaporating entirely over the following centuries. While the memory of the existence of the Roman bathhouse was ultimately seemingly erased from the greater public consciousness, the existence of the natural hot spring beneath the earth that had supplied the Great Bath with its waters was not, and notably, another bathing facility known as the Royal Baths, consisting of 2 smaller bathing pools also fed by the same hot springs, known as the King's Bath and Queen's Bath, was constructed unwittingly in very close proximity to the original forgotten Roman bathhouse buried just beneath them. The newly constructed royal baths would quickly garner a reputation for the restorative properties of the waters within them, and would draw in many visitors to Bath throughout the centuries who sought to bask in the curative waters of the hot spring-fed baths. However, in the late 1800s, the flow of water from the hot springs feeding the royal baths would seemingly be diverted from supplying them with water at the usual rate, and thus the city's surveyor-architect, a man named Major Charles Davis, would be tasked with identifying the cause of this arbitrary anomaly. During his investigation, Major Davis would subsequently discover that the cause of the water flow diversion was in fact due to the waters flowing into the long-lost Great Bath, leading him to rediscovering the ruins of the Roman bathhouse buried beneath the rubble. Following Major Davis's remarkable rediscovery of the ancient baths, efforts were subsequently undertaken to restore the Great Bath and the remainder of the ancient Roman bathhouse over the following few years, and they were reopened to the public once more in the year 1897, after having spent over a millennium seemingly lost to the annals of history. In the decades following, the Great Bath would rapidly become a widely renowned draw for bathers far and wide, both tourist and local alike. However, the resurgence of the Great Bath's popularity would suddenly come to an abrupt and shocking halt in the summer of 1978. In July of 1978, a local middle school-aged girl was admitted to the Royal United Hospital in Bath with a high fever, severe headache, and an unusually stiff neck, amongst other concerning symptoms. These symptoms, particularly at the height of the summer, indicated that the girl had likely contracted bacterial meningitis. Thus, in response, the girl was given an appropriate corresponding dose of antibiotics to combat the bacterial infection. However, despite this, the girl's condition did not improve whatsoever after being administered the antibiotics, and she would remain hospitalized. Notably, during this time, hospital staff would make a horrifying discovery while conducting a standard cell count of the girl's cerebrospinal fluid, as they noticed several amoeba flagellate, which is a type of microorganism characterized by their whip-like appendages that they brandish during several phases of their life cycle, actively swimming about in the fluid sample in the cell counting chamber. Specifically in this case, the species of amoeba flagellate discovered was a relatively rare and yet particularly deadly variety, Naegleria fowleri, which is known colloquially as the brain-eating amoeba. Upon making this unexpected and frankly bleak discovery, the girl was administered a heroic dose of amphotericin to kill off the brain-eating amoebae in the girl's body. However, despite the administered treatment ultimately succeeding in killing off the living amoebae, unfortunately, 9 days after first showing symptoms of infection, the girl would ultimately perish regardless, falling victim to naegleriosis, otherwise known as primary amoebic meningoencephalitis. Now, this mouthful of a condition, to somewhat simplify, is essentially extensive damage caused to the brain and central nervous system from hemorrhaging and necrosis wrought by Naegleria fowleri infection. Naegleria fowleri infections typically occur in humans after contaminated warm fresh water that it naturally inhabits enters the host human's nose, where it subsequently penetrates the epithelium and travels along the olfactory nerve to the host's brain. While it usually feeds upon bacteria in naturally occurring environments, Naegleria fowleri, when parasitically infecting a human, instead feeds on neurons, one of the primary causes of the aforementioned neurological damage that ultimately nearly unanimously claims the lives of all but a literal handful of victims who have been lucky enough to survive an infection. Additionally, rather interestingly, the potential of Naegleria fowleri infection is why it's suggested that only distilled or boiled water be used when flushing the nose, such as when using a neti pot, which is a fact I don't think many people are actually aware of, so if you didn't know, now you do, I guess. Upon discovering that the girl had suffered her symptoms as the result of Naegleria fowleri infection, it became an extremely important task for local public health officials to locate the water source from which it had originated, and 3 primary potential sources were quickly identified. Both a fish tank and small swimming pool located at the girl's school were tested for the presence of the brain-eating amoeba. However, both were determined not to contain any Naegleria fowleri within them, undoubtedly, likely much to the dismay of public health officials, as the final suspected source of the girl's infection posed far more dire and, quite literally, deeper implications. The final opportunity where the girl may have become infected was when she participated in a swim gala as a member of the Bath Dolphins swim team at a local indoor swimming pool facility, the Bow Street Baths, which, much like the baths I mentioned much earlier in the video, drew its water from the region's primary natural underground hot spring, which is known as Hetling Springs. As I previously mentioned, Hetling Springs in fact supplied a number of local facilities with their water, including the aforementioned Bow Street Baths, the Cross Baths, the City Technical College, a spa laundry facility, several local therapeutic spas, and most importantly, the Royal Baths and Great Bath as well. Officials would opt to test a sample from the holding tanks at the aforementioned spa laundry facility and would indeed discover Naegleria fowleri within their collected water samples, thus subsequently leading officials to suspect that Naegleria fowleri contaminated soil was seeping into the spring from the previous boreholes made to access the aquifer from directly above it, and thus officials further suspected that all facilities drawing water from Hetling Springs from these topside boreholes had likely become contaminated, and all facilities sourcing their water from Hetling Springs were subsequently temporarily shuttered, and all pools were ordered drained by officials. Public health officials notably would garner a particular interest in the Great Bath in their efforts to further support their previously suspected findings, as it obviously utilized the by far oldest borehole. And as suspected, after draining it, numerous samples of Naegleria fowleri, as well as 2 further species of amoebae, were discovered within the Great Bath, ultimately leading to its indefinite closure for bathing. However, while this initially did have a huge impact on the tourist spa industry in Bath, in the mid-1980s, a new borehole accessing Hetling Springs was drilled at a depth of approximately 197 feet to once again provide the city of Bath with an uncontaminated source of hot spring water once more, as the new borehole was drilled deep enough as to prevent potential soil contamination in the future, and also deep enough as to avoid any potential contamination from previous boreholes that accessed the aquifer from above. The water drawn from this new deep access borehole has been constantly monitored and tested for potential contamination in the years following. However, all such tests have resulted in negative results, and it continues to supply Bath's many modern-day spas as their source of spring water to this day. Thank you all for watching.